Okay, why don't we start it off? Good morning, everyone, or I should say good afternoon, everyone. It's 12:02. My name is Stephen Cash. I'm the Executive Director of the Steady State. What we're going to do this morning, and this is our second quick hit effort in which we bring together some of our experts from the Steady State with members of the media on a topic of interest and saliency at that moment, and have an on-the-record effort to ask questions, hear from some of the experts. And what I'm going to do very quickly here is just briefly tell you what the Steady State is. We'll go around the room with our panelists, and then we will open it up to questions. We have a full hour outlined here. We will record this, and I will make it available. It will be on our website probably by tomorrow or the day after. And if you are interested in following up with any one or more of our panelists, we can probably make that happen. So the Steady State is a group of around 280 now former national security senior officials. It ranges from Central Intelligence Agency to the Department of State to the Director of National Intelligence's office to the Department of Defense and FBI. Most of us had long and fulfilling careers in the national security establishment. And as you probably know, in general, people from the national security world tend to stay out of issues of domestic politics. But what brought us together is a concern that the nation is now facing an existential threat, and that we have a background and insight that can help Americans through the media to better understand what is happening and think about what to do in response to these developments. Today's focus will be on politicization of intelligence, which we cleverly named in the our subject matter, the mortal sin. What you'll hear from our members, and I'll ask them to tell us a little bit about their background at the beginning, is the concerns about politicization run throughout the history of intelligence, and certainly the history of intelligence in the United States. But what we're facing here appears to be, although similar in type, not similar in significance, at least in some ways. And I'm going to ask our panelists to speak to that. Again, we're going to take 5 or 10 minutes at the beginning to hear from everybody. But then I'm going to open it up. Please raise your hand. I'll call on people as fast as I can, and we'll move forward in that way. So again, I'm Stephen Cash. I'm the Executive Director. My background is a number of years in the intelligence community. I've been with the CIA. I've been on the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence and the Judiciary Committees in the Senate, and most recently at the Department of Homeland Security, where I was Senior Advisor to the Undersecretary. So let me turn to Larry. Want to introduce yourself? It's because you're biggest on my screen, so I'm going that way.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Larry Pfeiffer. I've also served just over 3 decades in the U.S. intel community, spent time at the National Security Agency. I was with the Office of the Director of National Intelligence at its stand-up, serving closely with General Michael Hayden, who was the first Principal Deputy Director of National Intelligence. I then went with General Hayden to CIA, where I spent most of the next 11 years. During that time, I took a detail to the White House, where I served as Senior Director of the White House Situation Room. And with General Hayden, I was his Chief of Staff. I now run a small think tank called the Michael Hayden Center for Intelligence Policy and International Security at George Mason University. And we put on speaking events like this one here throughout the year. So if you're not familiar with us, Google us and sign up to join our events. Love to have you. Thanks.
I'll turn to Bill.
Bill Pikney, 30 years with the CIA. And after I retired, I spent a couple more years with the agency running a small think tank, which later transitioned to the DNI. And then I spent a couple of years, same place with the DNI. Following that, I did a number of special appearances. I have had about 10 years or so of private sector experience with a number of companies, and I had a couple of contracts for European partners doing defense and national security consulting.
Let's turn to Russ and then to Annie.
Good morning. Russ Travers. I spent just under 50 years in the community, spanned 8 administrations, 4 Democrat, 4 Republican, mostly doing Soviet Russia stuff and then terrorism, but also multiple tours at the NSC as well as the National Intelligence Council. I can probably give you some sense of the dynamic in light of what's going on currently. Most of the career was on the analytics side. And therefore focusing on kind of the quality and integrity of our product. Euphemistically, we talk about truth to power. There's a lot of sausage making that goes on in there, but I would say that over my career, with the exception of some periods in the lead up to the Iraq War and the first Trump administration, which I thought bordered on politicization, I was never told or asked to change a product to comport with a political line. And that's particularly why my concerns of what's been going on here over the last few weeks with the Venezuela paper.
Let's turn to Annie.
Hi, my name is Annie Forsheimer. I am a former diplomat. I served for 30 years in the State Department, and my overseas tours included South Africa, Turkey, and Afghanistan, and El Salvador. A lot of it's been following me home. And I also worked at the National Security Council on detail, and I retired in 2019 and have been writing and teaching since then.
And then I think we have Susan. We don't have Susan. Okay. Did I miss anybody? Not. We're off we go. So let me tee it up and throw it out to the group and get this conversation starting. And why don't we start with what is the term politicization as a term of art within the intelligence community, both the people who do the intelligence and produce it, and the people like Annie who are on the receiving end of it, what we in the IC call customers sometimes. So let me throw that out to the group and get things started. Larry, want to take a crack at that?
Sure. So the term politicization of intelligence would refer to efforts usually done by an administration, sometimes by outside interests, to influence the production of intelligence assessments and analytic product to support preferred policy options or preferred ideological thinking. It's attempts to politicize intelligence are as old as the craft of intelligence. Frankly, you're probably doing something right in your analytic work if you have people from all sides of the political spectrum trying to persuade you that your analysis is not correct because it doesn't satisfy their preferred policy option. So the intel community works very, very hard to ensure that its analytic products present the facts as we know them, analysis based on the facts as we know them, analysis based on the facts that we don't know, works very hard to establish levels of probability for any analytic conclusions that are derived, and works very hard to ensure that if there are dissenting views across this vast array that we call the intel community, that those dissenting opinions are cataloged in the analytic product so that the policymaker has the full view of what is as close to reality as we can portend based on the information we have at hand.
Anybody want to chime in there?
I would add something to that. With respect to, I should point out that in my time at CIA, I was in the collection end entirely. Towards the end of my career, I ran the Africa Affairs Operations Division, and then at the end, East Asia was focused on China the North Korea issues, the Korean Peninsula, what we call Northeast Asia. At that time, we were on the verge of a hot war with North Korea early in the Clinton administration. And there were issues at work on the production of intelligence. From a collector's end of this process, as complicated as it is, and not being in the analytical or the delivery end, what I tended to see was a very, very patchwork quilt of intelligence, of information that we would collect from clandestine sources overseas. They never had a full picture of anything. What we ended up producing was a sort of imagine a quilt on the wall with big pieces of the quilt unfilled. And we would put that together as best we could. And when we collaborated with our colleagues in the analytical section, we would sit down and try to pull what we have collected in terms of the overall interest in the overall picture. Later on, after I retired and spending time in the think tank, which was called the Collection Concepts Development Center initially, it went through 2 or 3 name changes as it eventually came under the DNI with the creation of the ODNI. We saw more of the final product. We would see in performing certain studies on major issues that came up, we would get input from all aspects of the community. We would hear from analysts, other collectors, and we had a much broader view. And in fact, what we were asked to do was look at the sum total of what the intelligence community, because these were studies that were intelligence community wide and highly classified, what was the best picture we could put together of the entire capability of the community. And there was a great deal of always a lot of difference there. At this point, I would focus into a kind of an adjacent issue of intelligence, not necessarily the politicization of it, but the issue that comes up when you drop something on a consumer's desk that he either doesn't or she doesn't agree with, or is unhappy because it doesn't support a policy position that they have undergirded, or in the event of something which is highly controversial, then the general approach would be to say, thank you very much, and put that piece of paper in a safe, and then say, see you next week. And there was not a confrontation in most cases. There was just a kind of a discussion of it, and then it would be either disregarded or put aside. Today, that's a little different. I think the issue of politicization of intelligence tends to veer over into what I would call an adjacent issue of the relevance of intelligence. How important is intelligence to this administration? What kind do they want? And that opens up, I think, a number of other issues which we could pursue.
So Russ or Annie, I called this the mortal sin in the title. Did I overstate it?
No, I don't think so. As I mentioned at the outset, I mean, there is a degree of sausage making here in that, as both Larry and Bill have alluded, we are inevitably dealing with uncertainty, and reasonable people can have different opinions of different matters as we look to the future. That can lead to different opinions, like we saw in the Nick paper. Perhaps nuanced difference of opinion, and the policy community may want to seize on one of those positions because it comports with their preconceived notion. We can also find that beyond cherry picking, we may get the consumer community wanting to push back on the intel community. I frankly never had a problem with a consumer saying, why do you believe what you believe? And trying to really force a granular discussion on what assumptions undergirded your conclusions. All of that seems to me to be fine. Where I begin to have serious qualms is if you have an administration, kind of as Bill was suggesting, that is just going to put a piece of intel away. They're not going to pay any attention to it. They have their views of where a policy needs to go, and they're looking to cultivate intelligence that will support that. the beginning of the Venezuela thing, I think, started out exactly right. To the degree the press is correct, that Stephen Miller asked for an assessment sometime in late January. Well, I did that a ton of times when I was at the NSC. I wanted the intel community to tell me, and we did a domestic terrorism paper at the beginning of the Biden administration, and we used that as a point of departure. I think, unfortunately for this administration, they really didn't like what the Nick paper had to say. And that's where things begin to get off the reservation. And if the policy community is going to essentially ignore the lion's share of the community, then I do think you're approaching mortal sin kind of issues. There needs to be a back and forth about the nature of the sort of analytic conclusion, why it was reached. But when you start telling the community to rewrite a paper, now you're into mortal sin category.
And if I may, Steve?
Annie, if you could just jump in, and I'm going to open it up to questions, but
Yep.
speak a little bit about what nobody has said yet, which is
Yeah.
that it's more than disagreed. They fired people.
Right. Sorry for the clarification there. I appreciate it. I want to say, as a practitioner, as a customer, a user of the intelligence, the way I see it, the intelligence will unlock two things, either policy options or legal options, or both. The policy options that it unlocks are based on your assessment that this intelligence is without, fear or favor, that it is the reality as best can be discovered and analyzed, and that you're going to make your policy decisions based on that because it's true. And the disasters that we have gotten into with intel that was cooked speak for themselves, but I think Iraq has already been mentioned. The other thing that policy can unlock are legal options within U.S. law, and particularly, as I saw it when I worked on Venezuela, issues of sanctions, which is fine, right? You need to have a good legal case for that as well as the intel. But what is very dangerous is that intel is being used to unlock domestic legal options that this administration is using to disregard due process. And so it's gone even further than some of the previous disasters that you could say were based on faulty or cooked or slanted intelligence. It is getting us into what really is a constitutional crisis, where the ability of the courts and even the Congress to function are being put into question, based on the idea that you can cook intelligence and make it say what you wish.
We're around 15, 20 minutes in, so I'd like to open it up to the people who also are responsible for telling truth as best they can, our friends in the media. So the floor is open for questions. Just raise your hand, and if I don't see you, yell. Warren, go ahead.
Can you hear me? Everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
I guess my question is your concern primarily here with the ODNI, or are you also hearing politicization of intelligence at CIA, NSA, other elements within the intelligence community?
Warren, can you just tell everybody where you're from?
I'm sorry, I'm the intelligence reporter for the Washington Post.
I'll take a crack at that. Warren, my take on this issue is that it's not related solely to the DNI. In this particular case, the position of the DNI is at a gateway to the ultimate policymakers, and what came out essentially from the CIA was an intelligence report which took issue with not only the validity of the statement that there was a governmental program to utilize and capitalize on Tren de Aragua, but upon the floating of that intelligence, it came to clash with not just what an administration believed it saw and thought was happening, but what was a hardcore policy. So this is not just a difference of opinion about an issue, as you often find when there's a conflict between an intelligence finding and the degree to which it satisfies the needs of a consumer. This is a different kind of a clash. And it may be the only one of its kind. There may be more coming, but it's just as easily, could just as easily be a piece of intelligence from NSA, or from some other collector within the intelligence community. It's not related to the DNI, only because it flows through the DNI to the White House and other high-level consumers.
Let me turn to Jesse, unless anybody has anything to follow on with Bill.
Well, I would just offer that from an Intel community-wide perspective, the message that was just sent to all the analysts across the community was that if you issue something that is contrary to what our desired policy is, you could potentially be fired. That is going to have a chilling effect. I will say some of the bravest people I've met in the Intel community are from the analytic cadre. I mean, they are some pretty tough cookies, and the last thing they want is to see their material politicized, and they'll push back pretty hard. But there will probably be some who will decide, maybe for the next couple of years, I don't want to have a job in an office that's going to be producing intelligence on some of the hot topics of the day. Let me quietly go hide somewhere else. Or maybe it's time to go do that master's degree that I haven't done yet and take some kind of sabbatical. And so it robs the community of some of its perhaps best talent, perhaps some of its best analysis. I think it also will drive people out of the community. There will be people who will say, you know what, I didn't sign up for this, and I can take my skills elsewhere. Again, you're depriving the community writ large of some talent, and that ultimately starves the policy process, which is not a good thing for our national security.
I think that's exactly right, and that's frankly the greatest concern that I've got is that the tainting of the Nick memo was essentially an attack on all the analysts who do this work across the community, and to accuse them of, by extension, of deep state and politicization. I share Larry's concern that analysts are, while they are, I think, tough cookies, that they assume or have assumed in the past that leadership had their back. And what it feels like is that you do see people getting fired, and these much younger people are going to feel that their careers are at risk if they walk very far out on a limb. That could very easily lead to kind of self-censorship in what they write moving forward. And so you start to see an unraveling of the system, I think, as it's meant to operate.
And this is not an isolated incident. Just within the last 24 hours, Tulsi Gabbard declassified 2 intelligence reports done about domestic violent extremism, blatantly lied about the analytic conclusions in those reports, suggesting that the intel community was part of a deep state that was labeling anyone who disagreed with Biden administration policies, particularly around COVID, that the community was in cahoots with the Biden administration in labeling those who disagree with policy as being domestic violent extremisms. If you read the reports that they actually declassified and put out there, that is not at all what they say. The DNI Public Affairs Office then put out a statement applauding what she did and saying it was an attack on the deep state, an attack on themselves. And then you had the House Intel Committee put out a statement not only supporting what Tulsi Gabbard had just done, but then attacking the analytic integrity of the intelligence community analytic cadre writ large. You're sitting as an analyst in your office trying to put out nice intel reports, and you see this continuing stream of attacks from the head of the community with no pushback, public pushback from your own agency head, and then the oversight committee that's responsible for ensuring the community is doing the right thing jumps on, doubles down, and further attacks what you do for a living. This is not good.
If I could just add a footnote to that, since this is the kind of the core issue here. There are so many different kinds of intelligence. Sometimes it's just so, it has such impact, it is so compelling and convincing, there's never any argument about it. And in other cases, we fuss with stuff for a very, very long time, trying to figure out what the real truth is. And as Russ had mentioned, it's a best shot, a best attempt to try to put together a picture that makes some sense. In this particular case, particularly in view of what Larry just pointed out, it raises the question of not the relevance of intelligence, but whether or not the administration wants intelligence. It is deliberately cutting itself off from the flow of information. Most policymakers would recognize that the intelligence doesn't always please them. They don't like to hear it, but they will admit that they want to hear a dissenting view now and then. This administration is not taking that position. What they're doing is apparently turning themselves off from the flow of information, and that is an extremely bad situation to be in.
Let me turn to Jesse, who's had his hand up.
Now, I actually have a question to Bill on your point. What kind of a country are we if we don't listen to the truth from these analysts? And what in particular are you most worried about them politicizing? What particular area of the world? We've seen them do it with Venezuela and TDA, but what particular part of the world would politicizing intelligence be the most detrimental to the U.S. based on what we've already heard Trump say so far about specific regions?
Hey, Jesse, can you just say where you're from so everyone can know?
All right, Jesse Rodriguez. I oversee all the booking and editorial here at MSNBC.
Sure. I've thought about this just over the past 48 hours, and in particular because of the difficulty the intelligence community faces with regard to focusing on policies. They focus on and will always focus on Russia and certainly China and the usual issues of the new axis of powers and such. But today, given the tariffs, given the loss of our strong alliances, or at least the interruption of alliances with the Europeans, as well as with some East Asian countries, the idea of knowing exactly what policies are prominent, top line concerns for an administration is difficult to know, if not impossible at this point. Not only have policies changed, such as with respect to Russia and Ukraine, but the policies are almost in a near constant state of flux, it seems to me, which makes the difficulties for the intelligence community to focus on hot and high points and know exactly where the administration's tight focus is on a particular day.
Russ, you wanted to say something, then I'll go to Jonathan.
I would just say that you go back 5 years or so in the first Trump administration and recall when the president attacked the community, telling them they needed to go back to school on North Korea, Iran, and ISIS, I believe. And fortunately, the community's senior leadership serves as a bit of a shit screen for the entirety of the community. And Gina and Dan Coates got taken to the woodshed. They protected their analysts. But given, for me, past this kind of prologue, you could very easily see any issue whatsoever that the president wants to push from a policy perspective. I fear that you could have senior intelligence community leadership just sort of line up along whatever it is he wants to push.
Let me turn to Jonathan, and if you could, when you preface your question with where you're from. I think you're muted, Jonathan. Maybe not. Let's turn to Sean. Hello, Sean.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Oh, now we have Jonathan. So hold on, Sean. Go ahead, Jonathan. Just tell us
Thank
where
you.
you're
I'm
from.
Jonathan Landay. I'm with Reuters. I understand all of the prohibitions around classification, how just like other people, workers in the staff in the intelligence community have families, they've got mortgages, they need to pay for their kids' school, et cetera, et cetera. But at what point does the politicization that we've seen now of intelligence, and I'm sure there are things going on within the IC that we don't know about because of those strictures, classification strictures, but at what point does it become incumbent for analysts and others in the IC to avail themselves of whistleblower protections and that are legislated, and go to oversight committees to talk about what they're seeing and what's going on within the intelligence community? And in particular, I'm wondering about this creature called the DIG, the Directors Intelligence Group. And if they don't get the kind of protections and response that they are due by the oversight committees, which are controlled by the president's party, at what point do they have an obligation to go to members of the press and talk about and disclose what is going on to intelligence and how it's being politicized? As I said, I understand the strictures on classification, and that they've taken that they've signed non-disclosure agreements, et cetera, et cetera. We know all about that. But given the extraordinary times we are now in, at what point is it do people in the intelligence community have an obligation to disclose what's going on to the American people via the press?
Who wants to take that hot potato?
Well, I guess what I would say is I don't think any of us are going to sit here and encourage people to go and talk to the press when about classified matters without having availed themselves of all the different opportunities within the community and within the oversight community. You do raise some concerns, as I did earlier, about the oversight committees perhaps being a bit politicized themselves at the moment. But there are positions known as analytic ombudsman in each agency and at the community level. There are inspectors general. There are offices of general counsel. There's the President's Intel Advisory Board and the Intel Oversight Board, all which afford these analysts opportunities to express their concerns in a manner that doesn't violate their oaths at the time. But I guess without encouraging anybody to come talk to you guys, because that would be breaking the law, I would say, however, that most of us recognize the value of a free and open press as an ultimate check on the abuse of power. And there's probably nothing Americans are more suspicious of than secrecy and power, and there's probably nothing more powerful or secret than the U.S. intel community.
And we have historical examples of where this became necessary, like the Pentagon Papers, like Iraq WMD, and I could go on. And we saw what happened in the first Trump administration with the disclosure of the cooked up case involving the Bidens and Ukraine. And there are so many examples that, again, I guess the concern here, and I think some of you have expressed this, is the chilling effect that all of that has had on the community. And, as I said, I just think that extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures.
Jonathan, I want to jump in there real quick and point out what probably is obvious, is that what we're seeing here in the politicization of intelligence is one small segment of what we're seeing more generally in how the administration works. And your question actually tees it up as a great example, because it's on all fronts, because the administration is putting pressure on the people who work for the government, who don't know when they're going to be fired, who don't know when they're going to be asked to retire, who don't know whether or not there is anybody left in the ombudsman's office or the IG's office or the general counsel's office or up on the Hill, and a recognition that the retaliation that could come from crossing the president is not only career significant, but maybe even personal security. I mean, we're going to be pardoning apparently the people who wanted to kidnap a governor. We pardoned the January 6th people. So I think that when you talk to your mid-level and low-level analysts who may be 28, 29 years old with a mortgage and a baby, and it's more than just the job. But I would also point out that Larry's right. You are, in some ways, you, the media, are the ultimate oversight, and the pressure's on you too. And we're seeing an administration is calling for you to be fired if you criticize him, and you to be fired if you report on classified or arrested. So the fear of publicly speaking is pervasive and, at least in my view, intentional. And I'd add that you would normally, in a whistleblower situation, you retain counsel, but that's not so easy to do right now because retaining counsel could result in that law firm being targeted. So let me turn to Sean, who's been waiting so patiently.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you fine, Sean.
Um,
Want to introduce yourself real quick?
oh yes, sorry, Sean Waterman, freelance reporter. I wonder if, and I mean, actually this has been addressed a couple of times since I put my hand up, but I would like you to sort of take it head on. What is different now? Because, you know, I've been reading John Gentry's book, Neutering the CIA, and I mean, certainly his contention is that this problem is, you know, there's a sort of significant track record, there's precedent. There's, you know, we've talked about Iraq, you know, why is it, you know, Cheney going 12 times or whatever, however many times it was to the CIA to ask the same questions over and over again? What is different now? You know, yeah, what makes this different? I think Annie touched on one thing, but yeah.
I'll reiterate that, which is the two ways that you're using intelligence, right? To make policy choices is one thing, but to make legal distinctions, to enact certain rules, to claim the existence of an emergency, which in turn unlocks executive branch powers. That's all just several degrees. I mean, it's not more serious than going to war, but it is very serious in a way that I don't think we've seen before ever. That this cooking of the Venezuelan example is so relevant to a couple of areas of focus of the administration that are domestic in nature, and that U.S. law requires a certain status of, you know, whether a group is considered a terrorist group, whether it's state sponsored, whether we're in an invasion or not. And the more that he gets turned around by the courts, I fear the more this is going to occur as a great escape hatch for doing things that are illegal and should remain illegal.
I also think that there's a kind of an important distinction between what went on with Iraq and now. In the case of Iraq, the intelligence community got a lot of things wrong. I mean, there is just no question that we were on the wrong side of a bunch of issues, or at least parts of the community were. And so there were raging debates. At the same time, the administration, when Secretary Powell had to put together his speech, he was trying to do the very best he could, I believe. And he spent a lot of time at CIA, and he was talking to a lot of analysts. But the intel community on mobile biolabs and aluminum tubes and so forth that were later proven to be just flat out wrong. And I think to both the State Department and DOE's credit, I think they were right and most of the community was wrong. But there was such a jumbled mess of factual errors on the part of the community and the policy community conflating Zarqawi being in northern Iraq with alleged Al-Qaeda linkages with Saddam, which I don't know of anybody that in the community that actually believed that. So in this case, you don't see that sort of dynamic, I think, with the Nick paper. Even the FBI, if you read what was in the Times this morning of the release of what the FBI actually said at the end of January, they were absolutely not falling on their sword about the TDA issues with Maduro. So generally speaking, I think you got the community speaking with largely one voice with respect to the Venezuelan thing, but it's being renounced by the community, and that's really dangerous.
I'd like to circle back for a minute to the issue of policy again. Looking in the back into history, there were times when the intelligence products from across the community on the issue at hand were in pretty much uniform agreement. Let me go back to long ago in history, to Afghanistan, our role in Afghanistan in the 1980s. I was a station chief in Islamabad at the time, and there was an enormous amount of intelligence being produced across the community, a lot of it from the station, but a lot of it from intercepts, a lot of from NSA overhead. There was never any real question about what was going on, who was ahead here and there, or what the purpose of the U.S. policy was at the time. We could agree or disagree with it, certainly in the course of history as things played out. But at the time, there was no disagreement, or virtually none. The second issue was later. When I was in Cairo and the first Gulf War, an enormous amount of intelligence was being produced, most of it overhead, some of it from clandestine sources, but most of it from overhead and from intercepts about exactly what was happening in that part of the world and what the purpose of the American role was, not to mention the fact that we had a coalition of some 19 Arab nations who came along with us and made the entire effort possible. Again, there was very little disagreement there because the policies themselves seemed to have a foundational sense of doing the right thing. In this particular case, it seems very different. How do you focus on Russia when you're not certain whether Russia is in the classic adversarial sense or whether there's a new Russia and anybody in the administration doesn't want to hear anything bad about Russia? How do you focus on some of the Middle Eastern countries where they were before marginal players, but today they are apparently replacing Israel in some roles? There's an enormous amount of investment being made by the United States in them and vice versa. So the policies now are very different. And how do we collect on a policy? For example, China remains a problem for this nation as it has been in the past and probably will be for decades into the future. But in other areas of the world, particularly in South America and Southeast Asia, knowing what the policymakers need to know from intelligence is not going to be as easy as it has been in the past.
Could I just one quick follow-up? The other question I had, and apologies if this has already been addressed, but are we, is this just a DNI thing? I mean, she, on the Venezuela thing and more recently, it's been a sort of edge case, has she? Or is this actually happening, the same kind of thing at the CIA and other agencies, NSA, NGA?
I do think we covered that actually, Sean. And the short answer was it's community wide. And in fact, a lot of the input to that report, the DNI is a gatekeeper, and the input is coming from the community, as is sort of clear from that. I'm going to go to Greg, who's had his hand up for a while, but I would point out one thing in thinking about the difference between Vice President Cheney and his noted forcefulness in disagreement, and give you maybe an analog, which is, I assume most of you have had tough editors and maybe even tougher readers of your newspapers who have probably criticized you and yelled at you and told you they thought they were wrong, that you were wrong. But I would hope you haven't had any of them accuse you of crimes or of treason or walk you out of the building and fire you. And it would be very different to be a reporter who's very close in some ways to what we do or we have done as a profession, And it is a real difference, and I think that illustrates it. But Greg, you're up. So just
Hi, Greg Myrie, National Security Correspondent with NPR. Is it clear that any of the intelligence chiefs has Trump's ear? Does he seem to be taking? It seems like he's not getting briefed a lot, much like the first term. But is Tulsi Gabbard speaking to him or briefing him regularly? Ratcliffe, or is he sort of sticking with Rubio and Steve Witkoff? Any insight on that front?
Somebody want to take that one?
I just don't know, so I really can't say.
Yeah, I think in
All
general,
I can base it on is the press reporting, which suggests that he's keeping the intel community at arm's length. My guess is, if this is just my speculation, he probably is hearing and talking more with Ratcliffe than probably anybody else. But Tulsi Gabbard appears to be, playing a very public role as an attack dog. But when it comes to perhaps listening to the occasional intel input from an actual intel agency head, I would guess Ratcliffe before anybody else.
Brett? Brett, you're up. And Brett disappeared.
Can you hear me okay?
Oh, now we
Yeah.
can hear you.
Okay, good. Nice to see you all. I cover Intel at the Wall Street Journal. Larry, you mentioned Tulsi Gabbard's sort of public role here. My question is about her, and we know that she's trying to take greater responsibility or oversight for the NIC and PDB. I guess what I'd like to know is, what's your sense of her intentions or even her ability to create more of a power base at ODNI?
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in first. And one thing to clarify is the NIC and the PDB have been the DNI's responsibility since, for 20 years. Decisions were made in those very early days when I was there that it made the most sense to leave both institutions at CIA headquarters. It gave them closer geographic proximity to the all-source analysts that were there. It also, from a purely mechanical perspective, it gave them close proximity to the production centers for producing the PDB, for producing the actual assessments, the graphics, you name it, the kinds of things any of you who work at a print publication, would be familiar with. There was also a geographic space issue. Liberty Crossing, where the DNI ultimately ended up, didn't have the space for the large NIC or the somewhat smaller but important PDB staff. So it's always been their responsibility, and they have taken that responsibility very seriously, usually through one of the assistant directors or deputy directors to the national intelligence director. What she's looking to do is geographically move them out there. And I think most of us who have been involved in the business see it as complicating things for a DNI, complicating things by creating that geographic distance and that remove from the production of the actual documents or iPads or whatever they're doing. There's also an array of briefers. It's not just the briefer that goes to see the president. There are briefers who do the PDB to a whole array of cabinet officials as well. So having them being at Langley in the middle of the night as they're pulling the books together or the iPads together just seems to make more sense. So I think they're just going to complicate matters. Why is she doing it? It may be for, as you would suggest, for appearance's sake. It might be for, maybe there's a bureaucratic battle underway that we're not seeing. Clearly, there are some who think the DNI should be done away with. What a waste of time it was, just a bureaucratic layer, et cetera, et cetera. I don't hold that view, but there are some who have that view, and I think that there are some who are arguing that in this administration. You are where you sit. she's sitting in that chair now. And, you know, when you're sitting in the chair, it becomes your home, it becomes your place. And, you know, perhaps this is her way of trying to make a stronger case for why a DNI needs to continue to exist. And then there's the issue of does it help put the thumb on the scale, having them closer in proximity? Yeah, I'd say maybe a little bit. I mean, if a DNI wanted to put their thumb on the scale, they could always do their thumb on the scale regardless of where the people actually sit. But perhaps there's a little bit of that going on as well. I think this decision was revisited on a number of occasions through the 20-year history of the DNI, and in every instance, the decision was that it made more sense to keep the people at Langley. I don't see that anything has changed, so it is a perplexing decision. I don't know whether, Russ, you spent a lot more time at the ODNI spaces than I did, so I don't know whether you have some insights on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I do think, as you suggest, it goes back to the very early days when the intelligence reform legislation that created the DNI was passed. Rumsfeld watered it down substantially in terms of the authorities possessed by the DNI. And so as a result, I think that the 10,000-pound gorilla analytically within the community has remained the Central Intelligence Agency. And as a result, most PDB briefers and a large share of the people in the National Intelligence Council come from the agency. That's where a lot of the analytic work is done. If the DNI was a stronger position legislatively, then I think you could probably make an argument for the NIC and the PDB moving to LX. But I'm with Larry. I think it's going to be problematic, I suspect, over time if they really try to follow through with this.
You have a question from AJ.
Hi, this is AJ Vicens. I'm a cybersecurity correspondent with Reuters. I'm wondering if you all could offer any insights into what you're hearing with respect to either the intensifying or evolution of the technological methods used to sort of monitor or surveil, if you will, analysts or others who might be thinking about, raising concerns with either Congress, IGs, the press, if you will. I'm wondering about the tooling on the back end, for lack of a better term, that's used to sort of keep an eye on things, and that comes maybe part and parcel with the politicization. Thanks for the time.
I mean, I would just say, so I ran the interagency task force after WikiLeaks, and there was a lot of focus on enhancing our insider threat capabilities and doing kind of keystroke monitoring and so forth. I mean, you surrender your rights to privacy when you're on the intelligence community systems, and so you're already subject to being watched. And I think you saw some of that with the when the DNI was very concerned, rightfully so, about apparently individuals accessing pornography on some of the systems. And so whether it's being enhanced or not, I don't know, but anyone who signs on to an intelligence community system is subject to being monitored.
I mean, I'll offer that I'm aware of current individuals who are more worried about it than they ever had been in the past. But as Russ suggests, I mean, I got hired in 1983, and I remember on one of the very first days I was there, we were told, hey, anytime you use a phone or the archaic computers we were using in 1983, you were surrendering your rights for privacy. You could be monitored at any time. Heck, there were stickers on the phones that said that, you could be subject to monitoring at any time. The reality is it's a very large enterprise, and as you suggest, through much of the modern history, the technological tools to monitor large numbers of people have not been in existence. Today, with AI, with large language models, et cetera, the technology does exist, and given the current political climate, there are people who are fearful. I have heard that there are individuals, they don't know who to talk to in their own organization. They don't know what to say when they're on the phone. There are chat messaging capabilities at most of the intel agencies. People are very leery of using those now in in anything other than purely professional antiseptic means, and that's sad because that puts it sets a tone that isn't inducive, I think, to people giving their best and devoting all their time to doing their job.
I'd like to add to what Larry just said. I think that's a very important issue that we're wrestling with now. It kind of comes back to the earlier question, I think, from Sean about what it is you can do to raise some of these issues with the public by going to the press. There's what we're doing here, but there's also the issue of a kind of a call it a whistleblower who would resign his position or her position and then go to the press, perhaps under with the support of a large non-governmental organization of some kind, and talk about what is really going on deep inside the community without revealing classified information. That would be a very important way to keep the American public informed about the difficulties that American intelligence is encountering and trying to do its job. But on the other hand, there is a very new and very frightening reality of retribution, where nobody can feel confident that what they do, whether it's quite within the confines of respecting classified information or personalities or taking issue with policies, they cannot be certain that they're not going to be charged by DOJ, which is kind of a wholly owned subsidiary these days of the unitary presidency, if you will. So the notion of what Americans, official, former official, retired, or journalists can do, say, and get away with without being somehow penalized is a pretty big issue, I think.
Let me add to that. My last job at DHS, I helped the Undersecretary for Intelligence run the CI program at the department, and in all of my jobs in the IC, as Larry pointed out, I read the stickers on the phone. I always assumed that I could be monitored at any point, but I can also tell you that I would never have hesitated to write an email to a colleague or to my boss saying, I think this is a mistake, or I think this is wrong, or have you thought about this in a different way, or this piece of whatever we're doing is problematic for whatever reason. I don't think I would do that now from what I'm reading. The repercussions of saying something on a potentially closely monitored system where it appears that any criticism of the administration, of the president, or of senior leadership is considered, I hate to use this word, but treasonous, casts a pall on any attempt to use these. And there's a reason why the IC, which is so concerned about security, has all of these mechanisms of chatting and emailing. They want analysts and operators to talk to each other and speak truth to each other as well as to power. And that's becoming, I think, increasingly difficult to do. Daniel, you were first on, and you may end up with the last question. We can go over a little bit, but go ahead.
Yeah, it's only right. Thanks again for taking the time to speak with us today. You touched on this a little bit, but are you able to talk about how the politicization of the IC is affecting operational day-to-day activities as well as, counterintelligence? Can the IC still function competently with these kinds of chilling effects as well as fear of prosecution from the administration to try and extract certain policy goals and legal goals?
Boy, it's a great bookend question there. Anyone want to take a shot at that? You're ready to jump.
From the collector's point of view, first of all, the narrowly looking at what CIA's operational activities are overseas, I think it's very unlikely that there's a significant drawdown in terms of what they're doing at this point. I think my understanding of what they would be doing would be attempting to run their recruitment operations and sensitive operations just as they always have. The difference may be in terms of who that information is shared with. In the past, very sensitive information was on a very limited distribution. It was not made available to every analyst or, sorry? It was not made available on a routine basis. Today, NSA, I'm not sure about NSA since I'm not familiar with the details there, although you all know we had a highly qualified general removed for baseless reasons. What they are doing overseas in terms of their operational activity, I suppose could be affected depending on who's in charge there now. But it doesn't seem to me that the current situation as we're describing it has yet impacted on the actual level of operational activity taking place overseas and through technical and overhead means.
I would offer perhaps a different concern, not politicization, but prioritization. You have an administration that clearly has some different priorities with regards to what and where they want intelligence collected. We've seen press reporting, again, I can't confirm any of this, but we've seen press reporting that there have been at least 2 instances where NSA and Cyber Command were told to stand down on cyber operations or cyber exploitation against Russia during some sensitive discussions that we were having with Russia at the time. You have seen, again, reporting talking about intelligence collection operations being reoriented towards Latin America because of the drug issue or the purported drug issue and the immigration issue. So, at the end of the day, it's a big, big enterprise, but it's, it can only do so much. And every administration is going to have its priorities. And when certain things get emphasized, in many instances, other things have to get de-emphasized. Or when, if the intel community is told to stop collecting on certain targets, we stop collecting on those certain targets. And so that's something I worry about, is that there may be some continuity or momentum lost on some pretty important targets for political prioritization reasons.
Why don't we end up there unless there are further questions? We are happy to do follow-up or try to arrange follow-up with any of you. You know how to reach out to me, and I will do my best to make it happen. I want to thank everyone for being here and asking some great questions there. I want to thank everybody on our panel for participating here. We will have a transcript and a video of this. It will probably go up on our website probably tomorrow morning. So it's in the media page. So anything you need from us, please reach out. And I want to thank everybody for being here.
Thanks for having us.